Trixie! There's something going on in the vault! Let's go check it out! Greetings, everyone! Jester Hyde here. This is a critique of The Knowledge of the Holy by A.W. Tozer, Chapter 1.
And here we go.
The following critique is not going to make a whole lot of sense to you unless you've read a copy of The Knowledge of the Holy by A.W. Tozer, or you watched the video I produced prior to this one where I read the first chapter. I'll leave a link in the description. I thought it prudent to include the preface within my critique as some food for thought. It's pretty good. Okay, preface. True religion confronts earth with heaven and brings eternity to bear upon time. The messenger of Christ, though he speaks from God, must also, as the Quakers used to say, speak to the conditions of his hearers. Otherwise, he will speak a language known only to himself. His message must not only be timeless, but timely. He must speak to his own generation. The message of this book does not grow out of these times, but is appropriate to them. It is called forth by a condition which existed in the church for some years and is steadily growing worse. I refer to the loss of the concept of majesty from the popular religious mind. The church has suffered her once lofty concept of God and has substituted for it one so low, so ignoble, as to be utterly unworthy of thinking, worshiping men. This she has done not deliberately, but little by little and without her knowledge, and her very unawareness only makes her situation all the more tragic. The low view of God entertained almost universally among Christians is the cause of 100 lesser evils everywhere among us. A whole new philosophy of the Christian life has resulted from this one basic error in our religious thinking. With our loss of the sense of majesty has come the further loss of religious awe and the consciousness of the divine presence. We have lost our spirit of worship and our ability to withdraw inwardly to meet God in adoring silence. Modern Christianity is simply not producing the kind of Christian who can appreciate or experience the life in the Spirit. The words, "Be still and know that I am God," mean next to nothing to the self-confident, bustling worshiper in this middle period of the 20th century. This loss of the concept of majesty has come when the forces of religion are making dramatic gains and the churches are more prosperous than at any time within the past several hundred years. But the alarming thing is that our gains are mostly external and our losses wholly internal. And since it is the quality of our religion that is affected by internal conditions, it may be that our supposed gains are but losses spread over a wider field. The only way to recoup our spiritual losses is to go back to the cause of them and make such corrections as the truth warrants. The decline of the knowledge of the holy has brought on our troubles. A rediscovery of the majesty of God will go a long way toward curing them. It is impossible to keep our moral practices sound and our inward attitudes right while our idea of God is erroneous or inadequate. If we would bring back spiritual power to our lives, we would begin to think of God more nearly as He is. As my humble contribution to a better understanding of the majesty in the heavens, I offer this reverent study of the attributes of God, where Christians today reading such works as those of Augustine or Anselm, a book like this would have no reason for being, but such illuminated masters are known to modern Christians only by name. Publishers dutifully reprint their books, and in due time these appear on the shelves of our studies. But the whole trouble lies right there. They remain on the shelves. The current religious mood makes the reading of them virtually impossible even for educated Christians. Apparently not many Christians will wade through hundreds of pages of heavy religious matter requiring sustained concentration. Such books remind too many persons of the secular classics they were forced to read while they were in school, and they turn away from them with a feeling of discouragement. For that reason, an effort such as this may not be without some beneficial effect. Since this book is neither esoteric nor technical, and since it is written in the language of worship with no pretension to elegant literary style, perhaps some persons may be drawn to read it. While I believe that nothing will be found here contrary to sound Christian theology, I yet write not for professional theologians, but for plain persons whose hearts stir them up to seek after God Himself. It is my hope that this small book may contribute somewhat to the promotion of personal heart religion among us, and should a few persons be reading it, be encouraged to begin the practice of reverent meditation on the being of God. That will more than repay the labor required to produce it. Signed with the author's initials, A.W.T. Seemingly, these are the main ideas from the preface that we probably should keep in mind as we're critiquing the first chapter. The decline of the knowledge of the holy has brought on our troubles. A rediscovery of the majesty of God will go a long way towards curing them. And then we also understand who he's writing to. I yet write not for professional theologians, but for plain persons whose hearts stir them up to seek after God Himself. So I do understand that this book was not written for, like he said, professional theologians. It's not written for scientists. It's not written for philosophers or skeptics. It's not written for atheists. It's written for a very specific audience, and that's the Christian believer who wants to seek after God. At least from my own perspective, it's a supposed being believed to be a god. Even so, my critique may treat it as if it was a philosophical text, so you can take that for whatever it's worth. Right away, Tozer opens with a prayer and specifically mentions the God he is referring to is not the God of philosophers and the wise. Well, which philosophers? Because many of them were or are Christian. So he couldn't be talking about them. And truthfully, he couldn't be talking about atheist philosophers because atheists have no God with which to make appeals, which leaves non-Christian theist philosophers. But why would a Christian theist need to clarify to his God which God he's referring? I'm guessing but that his phrasing was meant as a polemical jab at a fictitious straw man god or gods of all non-believers. And if true, would not such a prayer be disingenuous? Furthermore, he's not addressing his deity, but addressing others in a prayer, which smacks of the idolatry he lambasts a bit later in the chapter. Tisk tisk, Mr. Tozer. Tozer makes a funny claim. The history of mankind will probably show no people has ever risen above its religion, and man's spiritual history, I'll take that to mean man's history with supernatural or spiritual ideas, will positively demonstrate that no religion has ever been greater than its idea of God. I don't know about that, Mr. Tozer. One could argue that a group of Jews rose above their religion and their conception of their God and created Christianity. The author talks about understanding a man's spiritual future by the man's conception of God. Yeah, so what? It's not like it's rocket science. According to most Christian theology, either you are right, quote unquote, right with God, or you're going to hell. If Tozer is talking about being able to discern details of people's future, then that smacks of divination and such, which his Bible expressly forbids. Tozer claims speech and thought are gifts of his God. Again, so what? Other traditions have made similar claims about their gods. So how did one determine the Christian claims are true, but all similar claims within differing traditions are false? What's their criteria for making such determinations? All problems of heaven and earth, though they were to confront us together and at once, would be nothing compared with the overwhelming problem of God, that He is, what He is like, and what we are as moral beings must do with Him. This is quite the extraordinary claim by Tozer. I do not believe this God exists. There, I solved the He is and what He is like problem. And if we are talking about the God of the Bible, what should we do with such a being if existing, and if we had the power? Well, lock him up in a galactic prison for horrific crimes against humanity. Tozer claims a right belief about God relieves the believer of 1,000 temporal problems. No, it doesn't, not really. Christian doctrinal living just replaces some of the old problems while adding new ones. Tozer claims the gospel can relieve burdens accumulated since childhood, as we have been, quote, guilty of foul revolt against the majesty in the heavens, end quote. Yes, I feel very free in my foul revolt against the idea all people are born as pieces of shit. Rather than being a correct diagnosis of societal ills, the idea of sin is actually part of the problem, as I don't believe sin accurately represents the human condition. Generally, human beings are good, and we can get caught up in horrible thinking and doing horrible things for a variety of reasons. And not that evil people do not exist. These people likely were born with some type of moral deficiency, or they were raised by a single mother. Essentially, this chapter deals in right think about God multiple times. And I know Mr. Tozer wrote this about 70 years ago, but not a whole lot has changed concerning this topic. How did Mr. Tozer know that he had the correct interpretation of the Bible? Why are there some 30,000 plus Christian denominations and organizations, and they all collectively disagree on almost every major doctrine, including what it takes to be saved and who and what Jesus is? Who has the authority to interpret Scripture? Which set of writings is to be considered canon or the real Bible? How does one know they have the correct interpretation of the Bible? And which Bible? What's the epistemological steps one can take to make such determinations? At the beginning of the chapter, Mr. Tozer makes a claim that what comes to our minds when we think of God is the most important thing about us. Ironically, I do not think of a God or gods, lest I'm engaging in my hobby of this, counter apologetics. I do not believe a God or God exists, and here is the irony as it pertains to Mr. Tozer's first chapter and the issues he's mentioned. If the God of the Bible would cease being the hide-and-seek champion of the universe and pop his head in and say hi, clear up all the confusion to the degree it would be insane to deny his existence, then most of these issues and the internal and the external issues plaguing Christianity would disappear. But as it stands, no one has ever demonstrated the existence of a God or gods without using fallacious argumentation or bold-ass assertions, and thus there remains no good reasoning to believe a God or gods exist. Quote, the idolater simply imagines things about God and acts as if they were true, end quote. The lack of self-awareness can be eaten like a tough piece of jerky. It's funny. To a skeptic, to an outsider like myself, every theist is an idolater, Mr. Tozer. And that would include all Christians. Tozer mentions the time of Anselm and Augustine as if that was the time when Christianity was at its best. I seem to remember history a bit differently if that is the case. Church fathers were writing at a time when heretics and pagans were being imprisoned, tortured, and killed. This was a time that Christianity was being spread by Roman sword. Did those Christians have the right idea about God according to whatever criteria Mr. Tozer was using? Mr. Tozer's solution to the problem may be unique, as we will find out, but Nietzsche diagnosed the issue back in 1882. And Nietzsche's phrase, "God is dead," has been a well-known phrase since the beginning of the 20th century. So I find it very hard to believe that Mr. Tozer came up with a diagnosis on his own.
Yeah, well, that's just like your opinion, man.
Feel free to add to the discussion in the comments below. And that's what I got for you today, folks. Be well on your journey.